Hey everyone, welcome to the next video of the mission showing a landing on both of Duna's poles. This video will showcase the departure from Kerbin, obviously, we're seeing that right now, as well as the arrival at Duna, the mission at Duna, and the return home. Simply, I included the return home because the landing and missions at Duna were not that exciting. I'll talk about that in a minute. Right now, we're plotting our course to Duna. And here you can see the encounter right there. And here's our trajectory through interplanetary space. And once again, the encounter at Duna. Now, once we enter interplanetary space, we need to find a spot to perform another maneuver to refine our encounter at Duna, so that we can arrive at Duna's poles. And we'll see that in a moment. Right now we are exiting Kerbin's sphere of influence and entering interplanetary space. Right now we can see the precise maneuver computer punching away, and here's our encounter. Now, right about now, I'm starting to get a little concerned with the delta V required to circularize. It looks like there's quite a penalty for polar orbit compared to the amount of delta V left in my tank. So a little bit of an adjustment here. We'll still head to Duna, but we'll enter a very highly elliptical orbit. And then we'll aerobrake through Duna's atmosphere to lower our atmosphere into something that's a little bit more reasonable. Now, I should have done aerobraking along with our braking burn, but I did not. Now, in the first video, I said that this vehicle was designed with aerobraking and aero capture in mind, but that was mostly with return back to Kerbin, because you can see that the side heat shields only protect the capsules. The landers are completely exposed, so Duna aero capture was not really an option at this point. However, I did miss out on not doing at least grazing the atmosphere while doing this braking burn to save a little bit more fuel. That said, we're still pretty low here, and you can see the trajectory is changing from a Duna escape, into a Duna orbit. And then we'll, looks like 26 days to get up to our apoapsis. That's how elliptical this orbit is. And up there, we'll reduce our periapsis down into Duna's atmosphere, and we'll fall back down into Duna, which you're seeing right now, where we will do some aerobraking to reduce the apoapsis. Got a nice view of the planet from the observation module once again. So the landings, it wasn't really that exciting. I just kind of plopped down on the surface, popped out all the science experiments, and that was about it. The presentation just wasn't there, so I sped it up, cropped a lot of it out, and eliminated one of the science excursions because it was identical to the other one. So just a heads up on that. Anyways, before we get too ahead of ourselves here, we've got our apoaps coming down, and we'll perform a couple more laps around Duna. If you look in the top left there next to the altimeter, you can see our apoapsis is continuing to decrease, coming up on 200 kilometers and continuing to fall. And we'll also do some science while in the atmosphere, just to grab a couple more points. And it looks like this is going to be our final lap before we raise our apoapsis. Before we head to our apoapsis and raise our periapsis above Duna's atmosphere so that we can remain in a stable orbit. And we'll raise that to about 80, 81 kilometers, I believe. Yeah. All right, so here's the first crew separating from the Interplanetary 3. It's Fobert, Wildo, and Trilbin heading up to the North Pole. I guess heading down to the North Pole. We've got to rearm those engines and then execute a deorbit burn, which is what we're doing right now. So we'll head on up here. We can see a sandstorm or dust storm crossing the surface of Duna right now, but it won't affect us as we're going to the poles. You can start to see the detail on the surface a little bit more. And here's our entry burn, where we'll basically kill off the vast majority of our horizontal velocity. And at that point, we'll just begin to kind of free fall. Until we begin the landing burn, which is coming up in a moment. You can obviously see the landing gear has been deployed, and in a second we'll also deploy some parachutes to assist the landing burn so we don't have to use as much fuel on the way down. The parachutes can be repacked for when we head back to Kerbin. So that's important to note and important to remember. After touchdown, we slide around for a second. Once we get our bearings straight, we'll run a couple of the experiments. Pop out the ladders, and old Trilbin is going to be coming out to the porch before making a pretty big jump for all Kerbin kind. Run some experiments. Oh, hey, watch your step. You good? Okay, Trilbin's good. Run a couple more experiments on the side of the vessel. Actually, there's quite a few. You got to jump around a little bit to get them. And finally, we'll head over to the cargo storage unit and start taking out our surface experiments. This is where I cropped out some of the video or chopped it out because it's just a bunch of back and forth. And it just didn't need to be repeated back and forth like that. So we're jumping to Wildo coming out and actually taking a bunch of the experiments. I believe Wildo's the engineer and Trilbin's the scientist. So Wildo's setting up the experiments. Trilbin will be interacting with the experiments. I'm not sure if that's how you're supposed to do it. I don't know a lot about these surface experiments. I've got to study up on them a little bit more, but I did manage to get some science out of it. Also managed to leave a bunch of junk in the trunk, so to speak. Somebody didn't check the manifest before launch and left a whole bunch of cargo that we didn't need inside of that storage unit. So that's a Delta V penalty that we definitely didn't need. At this point, we're about wrapped up with the science excursion. We'll head back up to the Interplanetary 3, where Valentina, Bill, and Bob will head on out to their mission to the South Pole and perform more science. So it's this crew's science excursion that I cut out, again, because it's just about identical to the other mission. We've got the separation here, and we've got a pretty good view of the side heat shield mechanism that deployed it, that arm, got it on the Interplanetary 3 as we back away. And just like the other one, we need to rearm those engines, and then we'll perform a deorbit burn. Here we've jumped ahead to the landing burn and parachute deploy. The landing burn wasn't the best. It was a little inefficient. I was just burning the engines too long because I wasn't paying attention to my altimeter, and it was just not that efficient. So, not the worst though. No, not a big deal, but we actually start. The vehicle starts to ascend before touchdown, which is never a good thing. So we had to cut the engines, turn them back on, and nearly tipped over. I'm not sure if those parachutes helped, but the landing leg sure held up just fine. So slide down the hill. No big deal. Casual day on Duna. And it's at this point now that we're back at Wildo's camp, Wildo and Fobert. We've gotten word from above that the Delta V situation is absolutely dire. Our fuel is extremely low, and we need to bring as much back to the Interplanetary 3 as possible. So that means stripping down the lander of anything and everything that doesn't need to come back to the Interplanetary 3, including 2 of the engines on the lander. I think I could have gotten away with 1 more, judging by the thrust-to-weight ratio, which we can't see because I neglected to record the launch. I do apologize about that. I do have the approach, though, with Fobert's crew back to the Interplanetary 3. The footage for the other crew, Valentina's crew, is a little bit smoother, and that also includes the launch. So now we're just doing our typical protocol here, lining up those docking ports, and then continuing on to the docking procedure. Once docked, the lander, or the ascent stage rather here, will transfer its liquid fuel and any monoprop that it is able to into the Interplanetary 3, just to make sure all of those tanks are as full as they possibly can. So once again over here, back down on the surface at the South Pole with Bill Kerman out of the capsule, checking everybody's inventory, making sure nobody's carrying anything they don't need, repacking those parachutes, and hopping on down to strip the lander of, once again, anything and everything it does not need. This was a little bit more thorough. I also got rid of the monoprop tanks on the landing stage, as well as the solar panels, along with all of the lights that were around it. And once again, 2 of the engines. There go the solar panels. There go the monoprop tanks. So now she's all taken care of. I even got rid of the ladders, I think. I just didn't... Looks like I chopped out that part of it. So back to launch. Back to heading up to rendezvous with the Interplanetary 3. The launch was a little all over the place. If you watch the heading in the bottom underneath the nav ball, quite an aggressive dogleg. And I probably should have, in hindsight, maybe tried this launch again and maybe just gotten right into the correct heading right away for the sake of the efficiency. It's no matter though, because I did end up finding an encounter, and it really wasn't too hard to get there, so we got the old precise maneuver computer back up, booping away, to refine this encounter with a 436.5 meter per second relative speed at a 0.0 kilometer separation. So we'll time warp up to that point, pop out these solar panels. They're not really necessary, but I think they kind of make the vehicle look complete out in space. executing that burn at this point. And this was actually a pretty smooth rendezvous. We got within, I think, about 50 kilometers, I think it said there. Maybe it was 150? I think it was 50, though. No, that was nice. Without any collisions. All right, that said, same procedure as before. Line up the docking ports, of course, and proceed on with the docking maneuver here. We're in orbital night now. Looks like the solar panels rotate into a neutral position. I guess that's what seems like they always move at nighttime. Now that things are docked, everything's docked, and the commodities are moved over to the Interplanetary 3. We're rocking out and jamming in the observation module, chit-chatting with the folks back down on Kerbin, and the situation is pretty dire. The fuel situation is not good. The Delta V penalty for flying into a polar orbit and the Delta V penalty for flying out of the polar orbit to rendezvous back at Kerbin is apparently pretty steep. And so we've made the tough decision to jettison both capsules to hopefully stretch this fuel. How do we feel about that, Administrator?
Today, we formally designate this event a Type A mishap to ensure lessons are fully captured for future missions.
Thank you. That's very prudent. So we're currently at 962 meters per second Delta V. And after we jettison the capsules, we've gained 132 meters per second. We're now at 1,094 meters per second Delta V. That's a pretty good chunk to get back. And at this point, we are what kind of felt like almost brute forcing an encounter with Kerbin. I guess I should have realized it, but I guess I never considered it really, that the polar orbit would make things a little difficult. And I will definitely have to make sure to keep that in mind going forward. Anyways, just like before, once we fly out into interplanetary space, we need to set up another maneuver node to refine our encounter with Kerbin. We'll be flying into a 34.5 kilometer periapsis. So you can see here that if there was no atmosphere, we'd fly right by Kerbin. But we've also used all of the fuel left in the tank for that maneuver. So there's no braking burn. It's all aero capture at this point. We need Kerbin's atmosphere to slow us down enough into a capture. So at this point, we're going to reel in those solar panels. And we will shortly be entering the atmosphere at about 4.1 kilometers per second. It's getting pretty spicy already. Got things exploding here. Not really that big of a deal. It was just an antenna. The Kerbals' faces were funny though. At this point, we can see our trajectory is curling into an orbit. That's exactly what we want to see. It's very good news for the mission and for all 11 Kerbals on board. If we look up into the top right, you're able to see the ablator that is getting cooked off as we enter the atmosphere. Once again, we're just doing a couple of laps like we did at Duna now to reduce our apoapsis into a something a little bit more reasonable, something a little lower. We can see the apoapsis is decreasing quite a bit. Now we're below 500 kilometers. Just over 375 right now. 370. And this is going to be our last lap. At this point, we'll decrease that periapsis down just a bit further. And now we'll push our apoapsis out to just over 70 kilometers, where the Kerbals will remain in a safe orbit until we mount the rescue mission, which will be in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys for sticking around, and I'll catch you in the next one.